And I see my man in the background. We have Arnaud Develay. How you doing, Arnaud? You doing okay today?
Hello, Jamal. I'm doing fine, thank you.
No, thank
Just
you.
a little shout out to Ted Wall. I've been a big fan of his cartoons for the better part of the last 3 decades.
Oh, have you been? Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sure he would love to hear you say that. Yeah, he's been doing it for a while. He's been doing God's work for a very long time. So yeah, just for the audience, Arnaud Develay. He's an author. There we are, political analyst, international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book, Foreign Entanglements: Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America's Political Consensus. And Arnaud, considering that you're an international criminal lawyer, well, we have what is widely seen as an act of war that Donald Trump has just initiated, which is a naval blockade, apparently of the largest armada in South American history, quote unquote, around Venezuela. Is that legal by any stretch of quote unquote international law, as people call it?
well, to make a long story short, no, or should I say, yes, it is completely illegal. It is an act of war, yes, in humanitarian law, bar
And
none.
yet, there it is.
And yet he seems to be getting a pass. But then again, those people, they pretty much go with their impulses and international law. The rule of law, as a general predicate, is pretty much a casualty of how they conduct politics. They don't seem to seek legal analysis from there, and God knows there are a lot of lawyers in and around the White House or executive branch at large. But yeah, no, the Trump administration, but not only the Trump administration. Under Obama, we had the illegal use of drone, which basically raised a lot of issues on the lack of due process pertaining to U.S. citizen at that. They might
And
have
why?
been of foreign
And it's wild.
extraction, but yes, exactly. And useless to say, we don't have to go back to the Bush Jr. administration, but that's was pretty much connoted as well in terms of bypassing Security Council resolution bearing on the use of force, if anything. So yeah, it's par for the course. It's all in. It's a continuation of lawlessness at the highest level of a, for better or for worse, a very influential state actor. So this has the direct effect to set a precedent, and then other countries feel like they can do the same thing since the United States is doing it. That's the biggest tragedy of it all.
I am super curious from your take of what Russia, China, and Iran is going to do. All of these are trading partners with Venezuela. And if a Chinese ship, Russian ship, Iranian ship is going to Venezuela and that ship gets either boarded, which it has been, by the way, a Russian ship was boarded
As
off, apparently. A Chinese ship was taken. I don't think it was going to Iran, but either way, the precedent is still set. And of course, they took a Iranian ship, and Iran responded by taking another ship that was
you
closer
go.
to Iran at that point. But I guess my thing is, how long is Russia and China going to accept this idea that their goods and services or goods are going to be blockaded from going to Venezuela? I mean, this is an illegal blockade.
It is an illegal blockade, but we're dealing with nuclear power, nuclear armed states. So, as usual in those situations, you have to react somewhat cautiously. You don't want to see any escalation and yeah, confrontation, open confrontation. But yeah, anything bearing on reciprocity is most likely something we're likely to see. So that our viewers can understand the context. This happens to be going on as the United States just published their military doctrine white paper, which seems to be putting, at least at the first level of analysis, say, the onus on bringing back into under upgraded, updated version, the Monroe, so-called Monroe doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that important? Because we're talking about Venezuela, but the whole of Latin America is, or by and large, a lot of those countries already do have exchanges, commercial exchanges,
Yes.
uh, crystallized in infrastructural installations, like in Peru, for instance, whose ports, that are owned partly or wholly by a Popular Republic of China. And what we understand is that this has got to cease. Every Chinese presence has to be somewhat evicted from the continent. And that's the idea if we look, closely to the doctrine.
Yes.
So Venezuela, in that sense, is but the lightning rod of a larger endeavor. And to the extent we have at the same time, U.S. policy which still bears on telling Chinese what to do in the South China Sea, it's a little hard to take. We know the Americans are lobbying or trying to prop up countries like the Philippines, for instance, to basically, assemble a coalition of sorts in anticipation of what? In anticipation of preserving Taiwanese independence, but this is even violative of U.S. Position on the issue. It's one country, two system, but it's one country. It goes back to 1971, so it's
Mm-hmm.
old news. But nonetheless, and that's the second level of analysis of that white paper doctrine, is that, yeah, initially they're regrouping in the Western Hemisphere, but we should add, so as to better confront the emerging strategic threat which they've decided China represents.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, you can try to reassemble the pieces of the puzzle in any way, shape, or form. The idea is that the interventionist policies are alive and well. It's just a kind of a retooling of it. And to the extent China has understood that they are, in the crosshair, why would that prevent, China from preemptively making sure that this open confrontation happens as far down the road as possible by, in that sense, making sure that the U.S. is thwarted in Latin America. So
I
we're
do.
back to
Yeah,
square one. Yes.
I
I
do
guess
get
that
that.
somewhat alludes to answering your question. I don't know exactly how they're going to specifically address this, but they're not going to stand pat and allow the U.S. to unroll their strategy, as it were, all the way to the final stage of it.
I mean, because China has a massive port in Peru. There's that.
Yep.
Um, Brazil is a member of BRICS. There's that.
Yes.
Venezuela could have been a member of BRICS, but apparently Brazil stepped in order to prevent that from taking place. But they obviously have a close relationship with Russia, China, and Iran at this point. Like, this is pretty mind blowing. If they because look, the Monroe Doctrine, the biggest issue was the European powers, right? The U.S. is like, we don't want
Yeah.
European powers in our backyard. Okay, well, it's not the European powers at this point; it's Russia,
No,
China,
they're
Iran, etc., and BRICS countries.
that's right.
So they seem to be going with this idea that they're going to somehow roll up the association
Roll
between
back. That's what they like to say. Roll back.
roll
They're
back,
gonna roll
right?
it back.
Association between South America, Latin America,
Mm.
and their sovereign relationships with very other countries around the globe.
With the global
That's
south. Yes.
outrageous. And yes,
Yes,
an
it is.
actual war. So, like, the
Yes.
catch becomes, okay, well, what does the other countries do about it? Like, if the US is like, yeah, we're going to take the base in Peru, does China says, okay, well, we don't want to have a conflict, so we're just going to let you take it. Look at what they did with Panama, right? We're going to take the base in Panama, or we're going to take the Panama Canal. Like, this stuff is outrageous. Like, this is so provocative. And I get that none of these countries want to get involved in this kind of larger war. But if that's true, then you might as well give up your base in Peru. You might as well give the port that's in Peru. You may as well break your relationships with Brazil. You may as well break all of your relationships with the countries of South America. Meaning, how far does that go for those countries to be like, well, we don't want a conflict, so we'll just, you can take my wife, you can take my car, you can take my house. That just seems
Well,
outrageous.
well, I think the reply would be asymmetrical in nature. They will reply not as symmetrically, but in an asymmetrical fashion. They have a
Mhm.
lot of economic levers, for instance, that they can use on issues that the U.S. heavily, substantially relies on. Uh, you know, I'm not going
Rare
to
earth.
get into exactly what those are, but in an integrated global economy, the U.S. having essentially subcontracted many of their some of strategic needs even to those countries, which they somewhat belittled for a long time, assuming that they would never rise to the peer level strategy, peer competitor level, to their detriment. Because today, we know that China, since we're talking about China here, have the
Right.
means. They have the means to, um, you know, uh, press on their interest and make sure that the U.S. Um, steps back from the brink, as it were. So that remains to be seen. But to be sure, I think as we speak now, and there's been a lot of official statements, somewhat muted and kind of a down low, but nonetheless extremely clear that Venezuela is not alone. Coming from Minsk, coming from Moscow, coming from China. So we can imagine that if the U.S., because at some point, if they want to take over Venezuela, they're going to have to put boots on the ground. It's, the size of Venezuela. It's not going to be just some special teams, working in cahoot with the Central Intelligence Agency. You're going to have
Yeah.
to do the heavy lifting here. And it's a huge place. It's a very hard terrain. We have a government, I would say, a regime, which has an ideological uh, spinal structure, which has been around for a quarter of a century,
Hmm.
at least. So everybody's there is pretty much a lot of them, the youngest part. I mean, they were born in it, and it's at the same time, it's not that far back that people would not remember how it was before Chavism came to power. I mean, there are a lot of frustrations, but a lot of frustrations also are born out of the sanction regime. I mean, if Venezuela, for instance, despite sitting on that huge pile of oil, cannot refine the oil in such a way as to make it, the best quality, it's only because the refineries are in need of spare parts, and obviously this has been, a very big problem, central problem. But Venezuela, otherwise, has really redistributed some of the revenues that it has been able to
Well,
generate.
yeah.
And it's almost like with Cuba. I mean, Cuba, it might be under sanction for 60 years plus, but I don't think anybody in their right mind would want to go back to the Batista regime, this kind of Chiquita, banana, types of regime put in place by, some of those corporate types in DC. So I don't think, this whole operation stands a chance in hell. And to the extent we understand that Rubio wants to take out Venezuela so he can get back ultimately at Cuba, which is really what the end game is for him, by depriving Cuba from the Venezuelan labor. Well, good luck with that. Good luck with that. They tried before. They tried back in 2019, as we all know.
Yeah.
They pulled a guy out of the box, Jack in the box, Mr. Guaido. You know, God knows they spent a lot of money. They had a corporate Madison Avenue, the whole corporate media, trying to prop up this guy into the next coming of Simon Bolivar. Now they come up with this Machado woman who's completely, I don't know, she comes out of Central Casting, but
Yeah.
she looks really kind of like spooky. And so I don't think it's going to suffice. It's not going to do it. At the end of the day, regime change. requires that you get your hands dirty. You're gonna have to roll up your sleeves, open the hood, and get cranky. And they've got tens of thousands of militia, organized, trained. They can turn this into a Latin American version of Vietnam. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because what do they have to lose? The Venezuelan, they have
Yeah,
nothing to lose. I mean, they're fighting really at this point, of course, for their sovereignty, but they're also fighting for their dignity.
it's
So you
existential.
want to get somebody motivated to go against you and really put everything on the line in doing so. You basically, tell them that they're going to be slaves again of American corporations. Their kids are not going to get access to the most basic healthcare needs. That they're going to live in abject poverty. What do they have to lose? They have nothing to lose. They would rather eke out a living on government provided subsidies as it is now than go back to those days where they were kind of relegated to shanty town and the likes. That's never going to happen.
It's wild. In the book Three Body, there's a war between the United States and Venezuela. And when I first read the book, I was like, okay, this is absurd. There's been a war between the United States and Venezuela. Why is this the thing that he's postulating in the book? And in the book, what was postulated was that the U.S. lost that war. That the one who was in charge of Venezuela, the president, effectively had a guerrilla campaign where he moved to the mountains, drew in the U.S. troops, and effectively decimated the U.S. troops with inexpensive weaponry and those type of things, where effectively overwhelmed the U.S. Occupation, in which case the U.S. has to pull out and the U.S. loses the war. And here we are. Here we are. It's just
Mm.
like now it seems prescient, but who knows if it will come about? Maybe Susie Wiles pointed out that Donald Trump just wants to murder people on the coast in order to try to force some kind of concession or whatever. But who knows? He may at a certain point he may be stupid enough to go in, because the difficult thing is you've had like 20-30% of the U.S. Navy sitting out in the Caribbean for like 2 months. A, that's expensive.
Hmm.
B, you have made all of this political weight behind this
You're
effort.
in too deep. Yes,
You're in so
you're in
deep.
too
How do
deep.
you pull out?
Politically, if you don't follow up with something substantial behind that deployment of force, then you lose all political
Credibility.
credibility.
Yeah. It's like it's almost like self-fulfilling. At a certain point, what do you
Yeah.
keep on? 3 months, 4 months, 5 months? How long do you keep this up? And if Maduro
Not
doesn't
to
go,
mention, the longer this Ukraine shenanigan is going on in terms of when I mean shenanigan, I mean this those. I talk to A, who talks to D, who talks to C, who talks to, and in the end, we're back where we started. Nothing of substance has been, then the Venezuelan diversion looks even more somewhat palatable for Washington. They need something. That's the only game in town in DC. It's the military intervention, but
mhm.
to what cost? I mean, have they thought that through? I,
Do
I
you
don't I
think
don't think so. I doubt